visualization, portability and optics, and because it has an Oculus tracker inside it, so it's got a lot of tech inside. And then one of our demonstration spaces, this is a scene from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. So we've just got it on an app. There we go. So what you do is you adjust your eyesight, get the position you want, and then when you're comfortable, put on the audio. And then there's a lot of yeah, you do. Sorry about that.
Lucky you can't see your eyes, but yes, got a bit of a
more mouth.
Yeah. Okay, so there you go.
Really, really cool.
So, a year ago I was working, well, 16 months ago, I started a news website, a sustainable site, to try and make people love music again. It's feeling that a lot of audience have been lost by exaggeration, by the reputation of news. Obviously, some parts of news have never lost their reputation. A lot of people have given up on mainstream news. And then heard that Facebook had bought Oculus Rift. The big boys were investing huge amounts of money in this area. So we thought the final brick in the wall to explain, give people context to use, make them love music again, put them in the middle. I thought this is what we need. So we sort of part the website and we're full steam into this. The first thing was to go to our common demo. So this is Perfect Launch, which is a video where you can, on a actually decide whether you want to look at the main event or actually double game the shot behind. And then the key thing is it shows you that.
So could you get this on an Oculus?
Yes. So this will be next week. This is going to be on somebody's app in the Samsung store, and then it'll be on ours later. Because you have to be approved by Samsung, it can take a little while. But people called Little Star, we've got a wonderful browser. So we'll be loaded on that this week. So we'll be on their browser system. We can put it into any headset, even this one on your phone. And then we'll be in the Samsung store, and you'll be able to use that on this. So it'll be, so you'll get with that quality, this quality for that.
Yeah.
So.
My name is Jeff Bland. I'm a researcher and teachers at Nesta, who are hosting today's hot topic. A couple of housekeeping things first. I don't know where the fire exits are, but I do know that the Wi-Fi code is on the screen behind me. That's my priority. And the hashtag is LND for London Tech Week. So the reason we decided to hold this discussion is because ideas about virtual or augmented reality have been flying around Nesta recently. And opportunities, and Oculus Rift, mixing up with Xbox and Samsung Gear, and Project Morpheus with PS4. And also we're seeing things like the HoloLens from Microsoft and augmented reality, Prospect Magic Leap, which seems to be everywhere at the moment. But I think the thing that we were interested in getting into is what does this really mean? You know, these gaming devices, as they mainly are at the moment, could mean many, many things. In fact, they could mean a lot more than just the experience you have to play the kind of games you play today. And this was one of the key ideas for a magazine that we host at Nesta called The Long and the Short. And Larry and Jeremy, the editors, are wandering around at the back. You can go to hi to them afterwards. And they made their season of The Long and the Short that's just started all about the brain. So all about ideas like neurological feedback, what it means to be in an immersive experience. And in fact, they have a short story about virtual reality that you'll find in the tabs on your chair. The rest of the pieces of that season will come out over the next couple of weeks, so go look it up. The Long and the Short magazine, it should be pretty easy to find on the web, I hope. And the second place that we've really seen virtual reality or something like it come alive is when we held Future Fest back in March this year, where we had one of the world's first neurological thrill rides. So we worked with Brendan Walker to create an experience where you have an EEG on your head, and the neural feedback from that starts to drive a virtual reality game that you're playing. And if any of you were there and saw it was a kind of theatrical experience as much as anything else. And Josh, who runs Future Fest, is hiding down the side of the stage somewhere, and he's around today to talk about the fact that we want to take this even further with the next Future Fest, which we're holding in autumn 2016. But the reason for today is that actually there's a lot of knotted issues here that we probably wanted to pull apart via a discussion rather than a singular experience. I think for me the two key questions that we're going to try and bring together across the various disciplines they cover are both about narrative. So the first one is about how does someone else designing or altering the environment you're in make you feel? How does it affect you? And how does it constrain you in some ways? Ready Player One, the book that is compulsory reading at Oculus Rift, one of the VR headset producers, it's set in 2044, but the virtual world in the book is full of cultural memes on purpose from the 1980s, and that's quite a limited virtual experience for everyone in that future playing that game. And what does that mean if we do limit our virtual experiences? And the second narrative-based question is, how do we kind of jump out of those narrow uses? How do we start to think about news and artistic experiences or almost anything else? How do we jump out of the means of virtual reality that have been floating around for goodness sake 30, 40 years now? So first up on the panel, we've got Rob Morgan, who is a game designer, and he's going to talk to us a bit about the cutting edge of virtual reality in gaming and some of the limitations as well, and perhaps a bit about the future ethics and quandaries that we might see in that.
I can kind of describe some of the things I've worked on in terms of my work, which generally focuses on how to give a player or players a compelling emotional experience and create an emotional connection with the characters that they're witnessing and the characters that they are playing as. It's still a question that we're working out the answer to, and telling a good interactive story is one of the real challenges that I try and grapple with every day. So I started off in the industry at PlayStation, and I worked on an augmented reality project called Wonderbook, which was a paper and cardboard book which came in the box when you bought the game, and it was covered in barcodes which were read by the PlayStation's camera. And you interfaced with this book the same way that you would with a normal book. You turn the pages. But on the screen, you saw the book in a completely different light. So you could see yourself holding this book. But via the PlayStation camera, the book itself could be augmented with graphics. It's incredibly hard to describe, and in many respects, trying to convey what the experience would be like was one of the difficulties that we had to overcome. Now, that was a Harry Potter title, so I collaborated with J.K. Rowling, and it was a spellbook experience. What was interesting about it as a game writer was that the player, and it was an interesting challenge not just linguistically in terms of coming up with ways to refer to the player as you constantly rather than ever, for example, saying he or she, or really assuming anything about the player, and really removing the barriers between the player and the game and the player and their experience, and making sure that the game was centered around them. Then I moved on and worked in virtual reality, which presented a very different sort of narrative design challenge. And I found myself grappling with sort of the same issues of player identity. Who was the player and how did they see themselves? But now it was because the player was not seeing themselves, but seeing through the eyes of a person. And in games, in particular in VR, everyone is grappling with this issue of who the player is, how they see themselves, how strange an experience it is to play as someone else when you put the VR headset on. And I've worked on games both where the protagonist in-game is a bit of a cipher. It's designed so that you can imagine it to be yourself. The barriers between yourself and the identity of the figure in the game are removed. And I've also worked on games where the characteristics of the protagonist that you're playing are very strong, they're very strongly characterized. And I happen to believe that strongly characterized characters are easier to play than weakly characterized characters. So, for example, it's a convention in the games industry. Many games create a central protagonist who is, for example, cool. We know that they're going to be cool because you have to sell the game. But they're often a bit of a cipher, so that you don't have to imagine when you imagine yourself being them. They often don't have very many identifying aspects to their personality, because game developers want to remove the barriers between you imagining yourself to be them and you. They want to remove the barriers of imagination, essentially. But for me as a storyteller, I find it's actually easier to get people to suspend disbelief when they're imagining themselves to be a strongly characterized protagonist. because suspension of disbelief isn't going away. And what I end up talking to games companies about, as a writer working in virtual reality, is often about suspension of disbelief. The idea that now we can create an immersive experience does not mean that suspension of disbelief is not important. It doesn't mean that story is not important, because actually, story, I believe, is more important than ever in virtual reality, because immersion is quite fragile. Our human eye is really, really good at spotting fakeness, and the minute it spots fakeness, it's going to pop the player out of any emotional engagement with the experience that they've already had. Whereas if you tell the player a really good story, if they want to be in the world that you're virtually creating for them, they develop a kind of emotional immersion, and they want to be there, and suddenly all of the blockers to immersion are no longer so much of a problem. So I tell games companies, I can save you money by eliminating the need for hyper-realism, because if you have a good story, realism is no longer so important. So I work in kind of a field of emotional immersion. Those are the games that I'm working on now, and that brings us to the future, or more specifically to last night, because as some people have hopefully seen, and if you haven't seen, I urge you to see it, Microsoft demoed a game called Minecraft using the HoloLens, their augmented reality technology. And I work a little bit in augmented reality, and I find that incredibly interesting, because I've been up on that stage. They did a big demo for the HoloLens last night. It's incredibly difficult to demo augmented reality experiences, just like it was for us back at PlayStation, because it's very hard to convey the difference between what the player is seeing and the real experience in real life. The absolutely key moment from this Microsoft HoloLens demo, which I urge you to see, was the moment when they removed all the augmentation from the camera. What you saw was somebody waving their arms randomly above a table. But then they restored the augmentation. You were able to see what the player was seeing. And what they were seeing above this table was a magical world that was being created, as if it was real. And I think that's the future we're going to look forward to, probably today, because a future where it's very difficult to know what other people are seeing when they walk down the street is incredibly interesting, but also raises serious ethical problems. A future where it's difficult to know if someone is seeing the world the same way you are, because everybody experiences the world with a layer of augmentation. That's something we're already familiar with, because if you're walking down the street using a smartphone, you're already augmenting reality to a certain extent. But I can see a future where the idea of people getting lost in virtual realities is not so much a worry as the idea that people no longer see the world in the same way, and augmentation allows you to choose how you see the world. Mixed reality, to me, that's really where the future is going to provide challenges for ethics as well as storytelling, rather than virtual reality, which essentially is creating a world which requires suspension of disbelief in the same way that storytelling always has. That's one.
It's certainly good enough to give you a really extraordinary experience right now, and that's only going to get better. So I've been working with a very creative filmmaker, Peter Boyd-McLean, and with somebody from Middlesex University. We started making a few films, and most recently we've experimented with David Grossman, the technology editor for Newsnight, to see what it's like with a presenter. Do you feel like they're talking to you? And since I've realised that with many VR films and experiences so far, more people watch the making of film than the actual VR experience, we've made a short making of, and I'm going to play it to you now because it will introduce some of the issues that I wanted to talk about anyway.
6 GoPro cameras on a special mount, which are looking in each of the 6 directions, so we can mostly capture video in a complete 360 by 80 degrees sphere around the camera. These are sort of meant for kind of action sports, that kind of thing. People use it for parachuting, put them on their helmets when they're driving motorbikes.
So it sounds like we're at the stage where we're adapting current technology and pushing it right to the edge of what it can do.
Exactly, that's exactly it.
We need like 2 people on this camera and 2 people on the other camera, because you don't want to be in a position where you've got a headset on and you're looking all the way around like that.
What's happened is VR's been around for a long time, maybe 30, 40 years, and it's always been top-end, very expensive, military, aviation, these kind of things. What's happened now is that all the technologies just come together, the display technology, tracking technology, so it's on. Suddenly it's cheap and it's widespread. So for the first time, we're having consumer devices coming to the marketplace, which is really radicalizing what's possible.
How to make it feel there, inside.
What are you watching?
The universe.
As I'm standing here now, I'm getting a 360 experience, obviously. I can tilt my head around. But I'm also aware of my body. I can see my arms, I can see my legs if I look down. I've got a sense of physical presence. And you don't have that with VR.
No, well, you can have that with VR, but I mean, at the moment, with 360 video, we just have a situation, you're just a viewpoint in space, so there's no embodiment. You have no sense of your body at all. Now, various VR games try to fix that by giving you artificial bodies. So when you look down, you do see a body, but that's even more disconcerting in a way because it's not your body. And you don't have much of a sense of agency, which is your ability to actually act within the virtual world you happen to be in. But of course, these are things that people are working on in various different ways, like bodysuits, hand devices, glove devices, all kinds of things to produce a sense of not only immersion which you get with this kind of technology, but also embodiment and possibly even agency, that you feel like you have a bodily presence and you can actually somehow interact with or in some way with the virtual world, somehow act on it.
So, what do you think? Does it give us an extra dimension? Or is it just distracting? Would it help in, say, not just Parliament, but in places like Tahrir Square? Would it help us tell stories from the field, from war zones and disaster areas better? Or is it just a gimmick that will make the audience feel a little sick?
Stories we've been wanting to concentrate on are quite simply stories that couldn't be told. And what the story is, the space and the sense of space you have when you stand there and watch it, makes sense of a place. And even with the college green shots we've got there, which you're constantly used to seeing on the news in a 16:9 frame with a politician, does look different. Westminster Bridge also looks very different, and you can come and try it later. And the other thing about those stories, for the person watching it, is going to help them, again, empathise or understand where they are in a different way. And that's something that the filmmaker Chris Milk has talked a lot about in a TED talk. And his recent film, Clouds of Isidra, which won the Interactive Award at Sheffield last week, certainly takes you to, it's filmed in a Jordanian refugee camp, through the eyes of a 12-year-old girl and her experiences. And there's one particular scene which I love, which is in a bakery, and it's not a particularly well shot scene, it's slightly overexposed, but you can almost smell the bread baking on the stone as you watch it. So the technology is not quite there. You're dealing with 6 GoPro cameras, or in Google's new jump camera, 20 GoPros. Google are promising that will all be automatically stitched once you upload it onto one of their servers. But I mean, just dealing with 20 SD cards and loading them up is a big deal, and it means that for sort of fast turnaround situations in news, where you've got to have a camera that just works and an operator who knows how to use it even if they're in danger, we're not quite there yet. But it's all changing, and I imagine, even within 6 to 9 months, this is all going to get a lot easier. Sound is another thing that is really important to these experiences. I reckon we can get away with quite poor pictures if the sound is really strong, and that's what a lot of VR is relying on at the moment. So bizarrely, as a former radio producer as well, I'm finding that skill extremely useful. But eventually, even for film, that sound needs to be spatial sound, so that when you turn your head, the sound is mapped so that the sound responds to where you turn your head. And that's still quite difficult for film to VR. There's some people are working on it, but it's still lots of improvements to be made. Editing it, stitching it, all that's slow at the moment. That will all speed up. And then the other side of the technology is how we get this to an audience. For the BBC at the moment, there's no obvious way. Google Cardboard and smartphones probably offers the biggest way to get it to the biggest audience. There are amazing headsets being made for gamers. You can blow up balloons. It feels magical, and bat them into the air, watching helium balloons disappear into space around you, or draw in the air with your hands and create 3D structures that you can walk towards you. They're going to be in lots of houses for a while. And the take-up, of course, at first will be by gamers who've also got very powerful PCs. So I think that's got a while to go. And I also wonder socially about it's quite antisocial putting on a headset. I did go to one dinner in LA earlier this year where a lot of people spent the dinner wearing headsets, and it was very bizarre, and there was not very much conversation. Indeed, anyone who wasn't wearing a headset was on their phone, and I think for a lot of people that's not going to seem like the sort of world they want to inhabit. There's all sorts of things that may get around this, and smartphone cases that become more user-friendly devices for watching VR will, I'm sure, all develop again over the next year. But we've got a bit of a way to go there. But what I hope is that very soon we can develop a magical new way to tell stories using filmed VR that really do help people understand the world in a better way. And for one of the BBC's public values, help us bring the world to the UK and the UK to the world. Thank you.
For the future for me, and then this amazing Professor Roy Ascott created what I consider the degree for me and for all future technology artists called Interactive Art, and I studied that in 1993 in Newport, Wales. For anyone who's not aware of Roy Ascott already, please look him up. He's an amazing technoetic visionary, cybernetic theoretician. He's been working in telepresence and networked art systems since the 60s, using faxes, and an early adopter of every telecommunication technology in art. Through him, I met Zillah. You probably are aware of him. He's more famous now for having an ear scaffolded graft onto his arm. But when I met him, he was doing amplified body performances, and that really got me started with wanting to take them back to an audience and make interactive artworks. So they were my main inspirations as a young artist. I visited some amazing events, such as Ars Electronica, that some of you may have been to in Austria. And recently, personally, I have exhibited in Connecticut Art Fair in London, also performatively in Spill Performance Festival in Ipswich. And most recently, a new symposium organised by colleagues of mine, Eugenia Emmets, is called Transmission Symposium. It's specifically a brain-computer interface dedicated environment bringing together artists, technologists, and anyone who's got an idea. So you don't have to be academic to join the group. You can look up the group now, Transmission Symposium, on there's Facebook and so on. And that took place recently in Bournemouth, where I also had an installation, and we had 2 very good days there, which is how I got offered a position in Sussex University as a researcher. My place is in the Department of Informatics, and for the Centre for Computational Neuroscience and Robotics. We're also next door to the Sackler Centre, and this morning Anil Seth was on Radio 4 from the Sackler. You can check out his interview about consciousness. I believe he's quite a celebrity at the moment. He's been to quite a few festivals as well. So I'm lucky enough to access these amazing minds as an artist. The cognitive neuroscience feeds and forms my work directly. So a little historically, I studied with the most famous scientist or psychologist to train to become better at the technique of lucid dreaming, which is when you actively become consciously aware within a dream, not just that you're dreaming, but you can take control. And we employed techniques there, which I see very analogous to the virtual reality environments, reality checks. So you consciously reflect throughout the day, question, who am I? Am I dreaming? Question everything. Because through training during your conscious waking time, you kind of intuitively then bring that into your sleeping time. And when you catch yourself questioning it during sleep, you're more likely to actually become lucid and attain lucidity and then be able to prolong it. Why? Because it's an amazing creative state where you are the director. You can use it for therapy, You can ask yourself really important questions that you can't solve in your normal, distracted, waking life. We spend a third of our lives asleep, so I postulated that why should that be downtime for artistic yield. So studying with LaBerge was rather bizarre, but I then used that information for an art project, and I was gratefully funded by the Arts Council of England to bring that information back and teach people, run workshops for 4 hours with keynotes, with food, with all the different techniques to help them then go home and sleep properly and try to attain a lucid state of consciousness. So I also work with the Dream Machine. It's a very old-fashioned analog device, a bit controversial in such a technological environment. You've probably seen it on a record deck. It's a cylinder with perforations, and when it simply spins, there's a light suspended in the middle. The perforations and the speed of the record deck at 45 on my template elicits an 8 Hertz cycles per second flicker. Flicker is a scientific term for when your eyes are closed, what you are receiving, and your brain then in turn tries to, well, the neurofeedback works, the stimulation guides the brain ideally into also oscillating at 8 Hertz, which is an alpha state. It's gentle relaxation, nothing too deep or out there, but I work with that and I try to guide people into theta, which is a brainwave state more associated with reverie, when you access those fleeting moments of wonderful inspiration and you can't quite describe them, they're so transient. So with this flickering device, whilst wearing brainwave monitoring equipment, I feed back sounds to the participants. So they have their eyes closed, that's why the sonification is vital in this case, and they're immersed in a multi-layered sound piece, just very intimately through headphones, noise-cancelling headphones, whilst reclining in a dentist chair, because that's part of my installation. They rise up on an air-powered, rather vintage chair, and they receive this experience. So you may have seen this on my website, which is luciana.haill.co.uk, some videos. And I've been inspired by Alvin Lucia. So in 1965, so we're talking about 50 years now, since the first artist sonified the brainwaves, the seminal piece, Music for Solar Reiki 2.
Thank you, Humanities. In the mid-1990s, actually was one of the co-organisers of a series of philosophy of technology events called the Virtual Teachers. So has a kind of an amazing legacy in this area of thinking about some of these ideas of augmenting ourselves, of augmenting reality around us, and how that kind of reflects on the different cultural environments or values we have over time.
Thank you. So I'm going to begin by talking about the 18th century, actually. During the Enlightenment, there was this idea that if you could make something, you could understand it. Making things was means to gaining knowledge. And the most famous example of this is perhaps Jacques de Vaucanson's Digesting Duck. And this was a mechanical duck which he made in copy of natural ducks, and it could eat and it could also defecate. This was merely a tool as a means to understanding, whereas nowadays we seem to think in a very different way. We tend to question whether you can make things without understanding them first. So, for example, this applies to artificial intelligence, where we say, how can we possibly make AI if we don't really understand what intelligence is? How can we make VR if we don't know what reality is? I'd like to point out that there's actually a very long history of attempts to make things like artificial intelligence and virtual reality, and it's not restricted to the past 20 years. And therefore there's a long history of making things without understanding what they are, and vice versa. And to take, for example, an extreme example, I thought I'd tell you about a coffin that's in the 4,000 years old. It's the coffin of an Egyptian king, Menkaure. And on the side of the coffin, where the head would be, painted 2 eyes, and these eyes are the eyes of the Egyptian god Horus. Now, what are they doing there? Well, I'm sure you've all seen Indiana Jones or played Tomb Raider, and therefore you know about the extraordinary technologies the Egyptians employed to protect their kings and their valuables, with shifting slabs and thick stone walls and pits and Curse of the Mummy and whatever else you have. But if you got past all that, if an intrepid grave robber somehow penetrated to the inner sanctum and reached the coffin with the king in it, what would that grave robber see? Well, he'd see this coffin with the eyes of Horus on it. And what these eyes permitted the king to do was continue to see after death, to see into the room in which he was entombed. So, if you got past all that kind of incredible protective technology, you might get to this point and reach the king and die of fright because he was staring at you. Now, this is a kind of virtual, artificially intelligent system. Technologies we talk about today. Rather, it depends on a whole series of common social values and belief systems and so on and so forth. And I wanted to point out to you, by using this example, how, first of all, VR can consist of more things than just technology. But secondly, to note how science fiction has been particularly alert to the way in which virtual realities and artificial intelligences might be constructed out of things other than the mere technological applications to which they're put. For example, Philip K. Dick, in his novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which was the basis for the film Blade Runner, at the heart of that novel is a religion, and it's a religion called Mercerism. And it's a kind of consensual religion in which all people play part by entering an empathy box. Basically, Dick is describing a sort of virtual reality into which people enter in order to worship. Now, that's a part of the whole political backstory of the novel, which we don't have time to go into. But my point in bringing it up is to suggest that we want to reflect a little bit on the structures that already exist, that we have around us, the social values and belief systems and so on, that contribute a little bit in the way that Rob was talking about, the willing suspension of disbelief, to the sort of virtualities to which we are willing to commit. And are up with that.
Thank you. Quite a few of you in the audience, although I can't see you very well at the moment. And we thought it would be quite important to have questions and answers. Due to the technical, use a mic that's on a stand in the middle to ask questions. So I'm not going to ask people to form a queue around it, which some people do, but it would be really great if people could put up their hands, and I'll try and select some people to go up to the mic in the middle and ask any of our panellists questions, or indeed direct them to all of the panellists. I would say please keep it brief. We've got lots of time for talking afterwards, so if you want to have a long conversation, everyone will be around until 8 o'clock or shortly after. So yes, any short questions, please raise your hand now and see if I can see you. There's one over there. Can you make your way into the middle?
I talk very loud.
Okay, if you talk very loudly, then I'll try and speak the question back.
It's a very simple question. Lovely commercial aspect, absolutely brilliant. But how can this be fed back into education?
Brilliant question. And we'll take maybe another one or two. If I can see there's one in the middle right there. But you've probably got the mic stand just behind you. Sorry, were there any others? I feel like there's one all the way over there. If you want to come across to the microphone, you can go next.
I was interested in asking the panelists about their views of the political side of this, because it obviously has very strong political content. And also, once you have people who have suspended disbelief, as it was described, to what extent are you manipulating what they believe and what they see in the world?
Yeah, really great question. And then one more, and then I hope you remember it.
It just reminds me a little bit of the Wii, Nintendo Wii, which was really popular about 7 or 8 years ago, and everyone bought one, and it was, you know, like interacting on this sort of virtual world, and then it just sort of failed because it was a bit shit. It sort of distracted from what the original sort of point was, which was about narrative, and I just wondered if VR is destined to the same Wii fate or not.
Yeah, brilliant question. Okay, on the first question about educational uses and kind of uses that will have kind of wider social value, I'm pretty sure that Zillah has some opinions on that, so I was going to take you first on that. I know it's something you've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah, I think the possibilities for learning are tremendous. Being able to transport a classroom of school children to another country to understand something for a geography project, being able to take them back to the past, the history, and for various learning games as well that are truly immersive. I think there are many, many possibilities there. And one of the plans from Google is a classroom pack called Google Expeditions, which includes a set of Google Cardboard and smartphones, and the teacher can control what the class see from an iPad. And I like the idea of that because, as I mentioned, I think putting on a virtual reality headset can be very antisocial. And I like the idea of a group experience where they all go to a place together. So yes, learning, definitely museums as well for learning. Again, it's the sort of libraries too. They're the sort of places that might invest in the hardware to be able to actually watch these experiences or enjoy them. And I'd start there in terms of building audiences actually.
Did anyone else have any thoughts on education?
Just to agree, I think any form of education where sense of place is really important. We can easily imagine, right, well, we're going to take these kids back to the trenches and show them what that was like. But equally, it's really important of creating manipulable virtual objects in space, which means not just the process of taking somebody back to a super real, carefully constructed place. It's really as closely as they want to manipulate and change orbits to see what happens. And it's in terms of simulating things and being able to model them in a way that's easy to learn from, VR and AR potentially are incredibly useful on that front. And also, I mean, the idea of having a group experience is totally true as well. There's a company which provide audio drama lessons where all of the students wear headphones and a drama experience is fed into them hourly rather. And they're having a combination group and singular experience. It's like a silent disco. If you watch videos of these kids, they're all running around, they're all listening to something that makes perfect sense to them and having a really intense drama experience that might be taking them back to a historical period, for example. But equally, they're having kind of a private experience as well because it's all being fed to them through headphones. And that's a form of augmented reality as well.
Last week I was speaking at a conference where Sugata Mitra, the Professor of Education at Newcastle University, speaking, and he was talking about the self-organizing learning environments that he's pioneered, which really depend on children learning from each other, organizing themselves into dynamic systems where they actually generate a process of learning themselves rather than a top-down authoritarian professor tells you what you need to know and here it is model. And he talked about various experiments he'd done embedding computers in walls, unstealable computers, in walls in India, and the way children use them to communicate with children elsewhere in the world. And it strikes me that rather than it being necessarily a very vivid sense of place, or a vivid sense of another time that VR can achieve, what it can also achieve is a much more vivid sense of communication with other real humans in different places. And I'd love it if Sugata Mitra were here and I could ask him a question. But maybe...
Until he responds.
Yeah.
His next question. So the second question was about politics, and almost politics with a small p as far as I understood it. So this virtual experience, who has agency in that world that you live in and the effects it has on you? And I don't know if anyone had a specific response to that about how they feel about it. Is there need for some kind of, not probably regulation, I don't want to use that word, but that some set of principles for how we deal with those new kinds of authorship?
Power will always have an impact on how these technologies are used, but I mean, it's important not necessarily to think of these as broadcast media, in the sense that if you have a world, it's relatively easy to imagine now, where because of augmented reality, people experience the world in an augmented fashion, like whether that's virtual graphics which replace actual physical adverts. When you walk down the street, we might easily imagine a world where the advert that you see, it's hard to tell whether it's physically on the side of the building or it's being augmented onto the side of the building by your system. But these things aren't just going to be centrally controlled. The personalization, personal control of what you see is also going to be an incredibly important factor. We're already seeing the political implications of what Cass Sunstein talked about decades ago, the idea of being able to create and filter your experience of media has a big political impact, because we're increasingly seeing that many people get their news from personalized feeds which don't provide very much in the way of contradiction. So people are able to create echo chambers for themselves in political terms. Now, how far that actually creates extremism, for example, is something that's still being studied. But the idea, just going back to what I was saying earlier on, the idea of seeing other people walking down the same street as you, but they are literally seeing the world, or they have set their augmentations up to deliver the world to them in a very different way, and you can't tell by looking at what they're seeing. That has immense political implications. In terms of regulation, that's a very personal thing, so it's very hard to regulate. And it is going to be impossible to regulate a lot of this stuff, because it's important to remember, we're not talking about content that's being delivered on high, or being a signal that's being sent to you. Personalization, the ability to merge reality with virtual elements which you choose, whether that's the level of advertising you experience in your daily life, whether you see whether the milk is off. You know, when you look at the fridge and you can opt in to a mode where it tells you whether the milk is off, or indeed whether you walk down the street and see a different party political advert than somebody else saw. That has immense political implications. Not a list of what we can do to fix that, though.
About this, and where there is an on high, and I think that comes across. And in this case, there are a lot of very powerful technology companies.
Well, I do think that the VR thing is being driven a little bit by it's exciting. We're all excited about the possibility.
And artists were often early adopters in an unanticipated way of new technology. So I'd like to use this opportunity to quote from Marshall McLuhan: "If we understand the revolutionary transformatives caused by new media, we can anticipate and control them. But if we continue in our self-induced subliminal trance, we will be their slaves." And I think that's where artists have a real role and a duty to open these things up. We often attain tools from medical or military purposes, and then take them into a whole new environment where they can be utilised by people for learning as well as art. So,
and that sense of play or creativity brings in some of the personalisation that people take this on themselves rather than just being fed up. And Dan, did you have any?
Invoking McLuhan now is a really good response also to the previous question about politics. And there are several layers in play here. It seems that with every shift in technology, we get a period where people don't understand the reality that's being represented and being distorted. So Photoshop. When Photoshop first arrived, there are all sorts of manipulations which people are unaware of, and the thing that gets people past that, but which always seems to lag behind, is a kind of generalized sense of media literacy, an ability to read the technologically mediated world. And it seems to me that if there is a moral or a political question here, an ethical question, it's to do with supplying people with the tools to interpret the mediated world. First of all, of course,
we do have a few more minutes. I'm going to let us over.
Can I just say the Wii kind of... It promised something and possibly didn't live up to it. I think the reason it was initially so successful, and it really was a success, it made Nintendo a vast amount of money, it's very easy to convey the experience that it's promising you. Everyone can understand when it says you just pretend to be bowling and that's how you play the bowling game. That's really clear, it's very easy to sell to people, and that's part of the reason why it did so well. Now, the fact is, the Wii didn't actually do any of those things all that well. It didn't have a lot of fidelity. The actual accuracy of the experience of pretend bowling was not very much like the experience of real bowling, which is one of the reasons that people slightly lost faith in it after it had already made Nintendo a lot of money. I think the point is that it's easy to convey that experience in a way that it's not for VR, but I don't think VR is going away. We might well see one or other headset very easily. And it may well be that the generation of VR that we're looking at now never quite gets out of the early adopter ghetto and gets into the living room and gets into the way people normally are used to experiencing their media. There's a big barrier to get over when you ask people to put a space helmet on to sit in their living room to experience some media, because that is a very antisocial experience. And I don't know whether we're going to get over that hurdle this time around, but I don't think VR is going away now. It's gone far enough that it definitely, clearly has a place in the entertainment market, and it will have a place in the education market. So although there'll be redundant headsets stuck at the back of the closet, I think we're going to continue to see VR developing rather than going away. And augmented reality is just getting started on that process. I think.
Yeah. Any hands raised? There's one at the middle at the back. Do you want to just come through the microphone? Be sure you can. It's quite hard to see from up here.
So my question concerns like the idea of reality in general. So throughout the talk, I referred to a virtual reality and a reality outside of that. But do you have any views on perhaps the two being one and the same?
Okay, well we'll take that one for the moment. So I mean, you all heard that well, but that idea of realities mixing, and almost coming back to Dan's point about what this tells us about our own sense of reality and what that is. It's not a clear concept in and of itself. If you have a start of 10.
I do, but it kind of depends on talking to you about Immanuel Kant, and that always goes wrong in public environments. I think that there is a well-established distinction to be drawn between simulated environments and perceived real environments. And it does bring up the interesting idea that virtual reality is simply a long project we humans have been pursuing for a very long time, and that is to copy reality, to make a perfect copy, in other words. But there's a certain paradox in here. So, for example, in painting, in fine art, in the realist narrative novel, we've constantly always been claiming that what we're doing is imitating and representing perfectly the world in prose, and this is just another medium. The problem with a perfect copy is that you end up with a very weird paradox, which is that if you do make a perfect copy of something, the real, then if it's perfect, there is no distinction between the thing that has been copied and the new copy. So there is no copy. There are now two realities. On the other hand, the problem with that is that if it's a perfect copy, it must necessarily miss the uniqueness of the original. It's no longer unique, there are two. So you actually you dilute something that's intrinsic to the original. Now, that's a very interesting state of affairs, which is normally kind of rather recondite philosophical chat, which might very soon enter our living rooms and become a much more pressing problem, not just to philosophers but to all of us if VR really does take off.
Someone like Rob behind it. And in some ways it's Rob's reality as much as that's a great thought experiment about how close can we really get to that idea.
Frankly, I find the idea of mixed reality almost more interesting than virtual reality, which is why I'm talking a lot about augmented reality. If you think of virtual reality as an occlusion, it's trying to interpose pixels between you and reality and create something entirely new. It's covering up your field of vision and beaming you into an entirely new space. And that's really good for telling certain kinds of stories and putting you into a really intense story cave where you're going to sit and you're going to experience this. But actually there's really interesting prospects for more ambient storytelling, which makes a story out of your neighborhood. If you imagine an augmented reality solution, which is less a mask and more of a lens, an augmented reality solution which allows me to look out at this audience and see one person and ping and see their Facebook details, so I never have to remember anyone's name again, anything like that. The idea of having a mixture of digital elements and real elements is really exciting for me in terms of the types of story you can tell, where you walk around your neighborhood and there really are monsters around the corner that you can make friends with. I mean, that is exciting to me as a kid who played games a lot, and then it's amazing to think of a technology where we can contrast reality and fiction in real time and blend the two together, so that people who now dress up and go out and play Harry Potter LARP and play that sort of game might instead be able to do that, seeing the world and digitally imposing Harry Potter elements into that world and being able to put themselves in a world where magic is real, but it feels like the real world. That's really exciting to me as a storyteller.
Okay, I think the news broadcasting, the reality that you're trying to get through to people is almost the first-person view that belongs to that war correspondent or to David in Westminster Square. And so it's less of a virtual reality, but a porthole into someone else's reality. So is there really a difference between the two?
Well, I think for those it depends how you film it. You might sometimes film it so that it was easier actually to have it to start with, I think, with a presenter to lead you through and be there. And what I would say is that filmed VR is nowhere near as powerful as university lab virtual reality experiences, which are mind-blowingly real. They really do trick your body. So there's a sort of classic walking the plank experiment. The graphics aren't that great, but you are walking a plank with a huge pit below you, and the tracking and latency on the headsets are absolutely perfect. It is absolutely terrifying doing it. You're sweating, it is so different, so far removed from what we're actually bringing to consumers at the moment via the Google Cardboard and the Gear VR. So at that level, it is extraordinarily powerful, and that sort of VR has been funded by the American military, have had huge amounts of money into it. You get haptic floors that shake, so the earthquake experience I tried where I had to crawl under a table, it really felt very, very real, and all the psychology experiments that have been done sort of actually really work out how you make someone move into that sort of environment are very relevant, and they're all important for designing these experiences, which are not going to be as good, but hopefully will have some power.
This is a project from 2012, Substitutional Reality System, a novel experimental platform for experiencing alternative reality, where he combines, using an Oculus, some pre-recorded reality and then virtual reality. And with the 21 subjects involved in this study, apparently none of them could determine when there were moments of pre-recorded data of footage being played to them. So I'll just read a little bit of this. We've developed a novel experimental platform referred to as Substitutional Reality, SR, for studying the conviction of the perception of live reality and related metacognition functions such as introspection, confidence, self-monitoring. He goes on, the system was designed to manipulate people's reality by allowing them to experience live scenes in which they were physically present and recorded scenes which were recorded and edited in advance in an alternating manner without noticing a reality gap. So it's an incredibly fascinating paper, and I'm happy to share this information. If anyone would like to know more about that, please come up to me later on.
What's the difference between a faked environment or one that's pre-recorded and one they created? Yeah. Sorry?
Don't look down.
Don't look down. Yeah, nobody. Okay, so we don't have a huge amount of time left this evening, and I think given that Immersively and Visualise have kindly brought along some of the VR headsets we've been discussing on the stage, we should give you all a chance to have a go. So we will wrap up the panel now, but I will be around for the next hour. So any longer questions you have, any questions you don't want to ask with a bright light and a microphone, please come and talk to the guys. Zillah will be just down here because she's got one of the BBC videos that you saw them filming. Actually, you can try it out for yourself, so she'll have a Samsung Gear headset and some News Lab
screen wipes to share with you and be able to tell you more about what she's doing. The others will be hanging around probably quite near the bar. That's where I'll be too. Yeah, near the bar. And thank you all for coming. This is a really early debate. It's a field that's still being imagined and reimagined all the time, and hopefully we'll be part of it over the next year and a half leading up to Future Fest. Thanks.
If you look round to your right, don't touch yours, touch me. Can you see a film called Cut One?
Yeah.
When you turn on Cut One,
Gone for it.
can you see David Crosby?
Oh, I certainly can. It's up to full volume.
So the very high one, you're very disembodied, and with a low camera angle, you feel like you're a giant. So it's actually needed a check time. So this is to show people that.
Hi Zillah. Welcome. Congratulations. I didn't see you after you guys won the checks. But it was part of you. I thought it was good. Oh. No, I thought it was part of
Top one on the right. Iceland.
Oh, that's cool.
Where are you?
Yeah, I see. I just selected something.
Yeah, you just select something. It's like you're not allowed to watch that one. You watch my boring one instead.
There's one with the waterfall.
No, keep turn to the right.
The one with the blue block.
There's cut one. That started.
Yeah.
So when you use the touch screen up here, that you're touch screen, then maybe not touch that.
Oh.
So you
People